Robert Stephen Kaplan. Rob is the president and CEO of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, having served in that role since September 2015. He represents the 11th Federal Reserve District on the Federal Open Market Committee in the formulation of U.S. monetary policy and oversees the 1,200 employees of the Dallas Fed. He serves as co-chairman of Project ALS and co-chairman of the Draper Richards Kaplan Foundation, a global venture philanthropy firm that invests in developing nonprofit enterprises dedicated to addressing social issues. He's also a board member of the Harvard Medical School. He was previously the Martin Marshall Professor of Management Practice and a Senior Associate Dean in the Harvard Business School. Prior to joining Harvard in 2006, he was Vice Chairman of the Goldman Sachs Group, Inc., with global responsibility for the firm's investment banking and investment management divisions. He received a BS in Business Administration from the University of Kansas and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Stephen McGaw. Steve is responsible for the development of AT&T's corporate strategy, as well as the evaluation and execution of mergers, acquisitions, joint ventures, and divestitures. During his 30-year career, he has a long history of leadership in corporate strategy and corporate development at AT&T. Prior to his current role, he served as Chief Marketing Officer for AT&T's business organization, where he oversaw marketing of both traditional telecom services as well as mobility and strategic services to millions of customers, ranging from small businesses to Fortune 1000 companies. He's also held key leadership positions in sales, international, and technology planning roles at SBC and AT&T Bell Labs. Steve currently serves on the advisory council of the University of Texas at Austin McCombs School of Business. Thank you, Steve. The Board of Trustees for Launchability, a nonprofit company serving Dallas area families, and the World Economic Forum Steering Committee in support of delivering the digital infrastructure. Steve earned an MBA from the University of Texas at Austin, a Master of Science at Northwestern University, and a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Engineering from Purdue University. And last but not least is Mike Vandeven. Mike is the Chief Operating Officer of Southwest Airlines. He joined Southwest Airlines in 1993. A Dallas-based company, Southwest Airlines is the only airline in the world to have been profitable for 46 consecutive years. That's pretty impressive. With over 55,000 employees and more than 100 million customers annually. He has held several positions at Southwest, such as Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer, Executive Vice President of Aircraft Operations, Senior Vice President of Planning, Vice President of Financial Planning Analysis, and Director of Internal Audit. As Chief Executive Officer, he provides executive leadership to the following Southwest departments: air operations, ground operations, technical operations, network operations control, labor relations, safety and security, customer support and services, operational strategy, performance, and customer services, which includes the company's President's Council and hospitality efforts. Just a small role. Prior to joining Southwest, Mike was a senior audit manager at Ernst & Young in Dallas, Texas. Mike received a BBA from the University of Texas at Austin. He is a certified public accountant and serves on the McCombs School of Business Advisory Council. He also serves on the board of Comerica, Inc., a Dallas-based financial services company. At this time, please join me in a round of applause, and I'll turn it over to Rob Kaplan.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Thank you all for being here. Mike, Steve, and Jay, thank you for being here. And Jay, congratulations on the great job you've done at the University of Texas. I was a senior associate dean at Harvard Business School. When we first met, Jay was senior associate dean at the time, so I have a lot of sympathy for senior associate deans, but he's stepped up and done a great job. And I know people who went to Texas generally are very proud of this school and the job Jay has done. And everything you talked about today, I watch as an educated observer, and you're doing all the right things. I'm very optimistic about the future of the McCombs School. Let me just make a few comments about the economy and some of the big trends we see going on out there in the economy in the U.S. and in the world, and then I'll leave some of for the Q&A to talk about monetary policy and some other issues. So let me start with the headline. GDP growth in the United States in 2017 was about 2.5%. We expect at the Dallas Fed that GDP growth in the U.S. will be about the same this year, about 2.5%. We do think that the tax legislation that just passed provides some positive benefit to GDP growth, and we've reflected that in our forecast. And I'll get to what some of the issues are as to how we see GDP growth this year and the next 2 or 3 years, and some of the headwinds, which is why we're not projecting even higher GDP growth. But we're seeing about 2.5% GDP growth this year. That is not as good as it was, say, in the 90s, but it is certainly sufficient in our view, to continue to take slack out of the labor market. So the headline unemployment rate in the United States is 4.1%, as many of you know, but the number I look at more intensely is referred to in the lingo as U6, which is unemployed plus discouraged workers plus people working part-time who want to work full-time. That number right now is 8.1%, so much higher than the headline rate, except if you look back over the last 20 years, you'll see that that 8.1% is basically at its pre-recession low, okay? And so why is that? It's not easy to get discouraged workers back into the workforce. Now, one of the notable things about this economy is some of the demographic trends. And when it comes to employment, and the most significant of those trends is aging demographics, aging workforce. This is true in the United States, but it's true also in every advanced economy in the world, including China. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but the point is GDP is made up of growth in the workforce and improvements in productivity. So if you've got slowing workforce growth, that provides a headwind for GDP growth. Now, this country has always dealt with periods like this where we've got aging workforce growth through immigration, maybe incentives for people to work longer, incentives for more women to enter the workforce. And so I'll come back to that, but those are some of the challenges. But in any event, we would expect the headline unemployment rate in 2018 to very likely dip below 4%. Okay, and that U6 rate I referred to, we think will also likely decline. And so we're going to see a pretty strong year in 2018. This is further bolstered by the fact that growth outside the United States has also been very strong. European growth is stronger than expected. Emerging market growth is stronger than expected. So we've got one of those rare instances where you've got kind of a synchronous growth in all countries by and large around the world. There's some exceptions to that, but not many. And so that also provides a tailwind for U.S. GDP growth. Let me make a couple of other comments and talk about the four big structural drivers that are driving, I think, the U.S. economy and to some extent the global economy. And I'll just mention what those are. So at the Dallas Fed, we do an enormous, and in the Fed generally, we do an enormous amount of work on big economic cyclical factors, but we also do a lot of work on structural drivers. And let me just mention the four big drivers. The first one I already mentioned, aging demographics. So again, if you've got an aging workforce, which we do, that's going to create a headwind for GDP growth. And this is why, even though our own forecast at the Dallas Fed is we're going to have 2.5% GDP growth in 2018, our best judgment is that will likely tail off in 2019 to about 2.2%. And our current forecast for 2020 is we may well see GDP growth at 2% or a little lower. Why? It's not that we're not running on all cylinders in the U.S. economy, and we are. It's that aging demographics and slowing workforce growth is going to become a real headwind. Some of the tailwinds that are helping, I mentioned global growth is helping, also increase business investment to the extent we can create even more incentives for people to work longer, to the extent that there's regulatory review, which might improve productivity, to the extent that there's infrastructure spending, which might also create some stimulus and improve productivity. All those things will be helpful, but this demographic trend is a big issue and probably not one that's discussed enough here in the United States. The two or three other big drivers, I'll mention the second one I talk a lot about, is technology-enabled disruption. The structure of the U.S. economy and the global economy is changing dramatically. And you'll probably hear more about that, I would guess, for sure from Steve. So we all know for years, for decades, technology has been replacing people. Okay, that's not new. What is new and is the rate of acceleration in people being replaced by technology and new disruptive competitors that are replacing old models for sales and distributions of products and services. And this is having the effect of limiting pricing power of businesses. This trend, along with globalization, which I'll talk about in a moment, means probably almost every industry I can think of, and for those of you in this audience, which many of you in business, you know what I'm talking about. Unless your product or service is really distinctive, you are probably seeing challenges to your pricing power. What businesses are doing to respond to that is they're further investing in technology that will replace people in order to lower cost and maintain margins. It's also, in my judgment, the reason why you're seeing a historic level of merger activity, because in order to afford the IT expenditure in many industries, you need more scale. And I think that's a catalyst for a lot of the record merger activity that we're currently seeing. The last comment I'd make on technology-enabled disruption, it's affecting businesses for sure, but it's really affecting the workforce, which is why we spend so much time here on the subject of education. If you've got a college education in the United States, your unemployment rate is very low, and your participation rate, i.e. your likelihood of being in the workforce, is very high. If you've got a high school education, though, or less in this country, it is very likely, because of disruption and to some extent globalization, you're seeing your job either restructured or eliminated. And unless you get retrained, you're seeing your income level and productivity actually decline during your career, which is, in our view at the Dallas Fed, one of the reasons why productivity overall has been more sluggish than you'd expect, even though every single business is far more productive than it was 10 years ago. So technology-enabled disruption, these structural changes have profound implications on the need for improved college readiness, improve early childhood literacy, higher levels of educational attainment. We are lagging in this country versus the rest of the world, really lagging, and it helps explain why our productivity is lower. And it's also why we need more middle skills training and retraining for workers. And increasingly, people that graduate from school are going to need to accept that they're likely to have to change careers maybe several times during their life and get retrained. It's a lot easier if you're well educated. It's a lot harder if you're high school or less. So that's another big structural trend that we think is having a big impact. The other two trends, and then I'll wrap up here. One is one we all know about, globalization. Increasingly, people access labor globally. Products and services, you've got to be globally competitive. This is why the trading relationship with Mexico, for example, while controversial, is so important to the United States, and we talk about it a lot. What's happened is, over the last number of years, 70% of the imports of goods to the United States from Mexico are intermediate goods. They're not final goods, they're intermediate goods. They're part of complicated logistics and supply chain arrangements, which we believe make the U.S. far more competitive, add jobs to the United States, and if we didn't have those relationships, trading relationships, it is likely we would lose many of those jobs to other parts of the world, particularly Asia. So globalization is a big trend. It's not going away. We're not going to beat it back. We're not going to turn it back. But it's an opportunity. And too often, technology-enabled disruption today is being confused with globalization, i.e. if your job has been lost or your industry's been disrupted, 15 years ago, you might have blamed globalization. Today, it's much more likely technology-enabled disruption. And unfortunately, today, we're confusing the impacts of both. Today, very likely, technology-enabled disruption is the bigger part of job disruption. Globalization now, after a lot of pain and suffering over the last 15 years, we believe at the Dallas Fed is an opportunity for the U.S. to grow faster. If we don't get that diagnosis right, we're going to make the wrong policy decisions and we'll grow more slowly. The last big structural trend, which we're not talking enough about in the United States, I would call it the end of the debt super cycle. The household sector is deleveraged. Over the last 10 years, that's good news. Household balance sheets are in pretty good shape. Consumers, 70% of the economy, that's one of the underpinnings of the economy, that's good. Corporate leverage is higher, but importantly, the financial sector is deleveraged. And so I think corporate leverage being higher is probably manageable. The one sector in our economy that's dramatically more leveraged than it was 10 years ago is the US government. So government debt held by the public is up to 76% of GDP, but the unfunded present value future entitlements is now $49 trillion. This is why if you look at the Congressional Budget Office report, deficits as a percentage of GDP are going like this, even before the recent legislation, okay? And our own judgment, my own judgment at the Dallas Fed is this is likely to create a headwind for future economic growth, which is why we're so sensitive to the thought that the current level of debt is likely not sustainable, and we need to be taking steps to get it more under control, or else it could create a future headwind for economic growth. So those are the four big structural drivers that we tend to focus on. They explain a lot of the results that we're currently seeing. So the good news is, back to where I started, 2018 growth is going to be fine. We're going to have a solid year of growth. My concern is more the out years due to demographic changes as we trend down toward potential GDP growth, which will be lower. We're likely to be more leveraged at the end of that than we are today, unfortunately. And we're going to need to come to grips with all this if we're going to improve our growth in the years ahead. Let me stop there and we'll talk more in the Q&A. Thank you.
Well, I don't know about you all, but I thought that was an excellent, excellent overview. It makes me really comfortable that Robert is the president and the CEO of the Dallas Federal Reserve Bank, and I need to have an escort to get into the building. So, how many of you guys watched the football game last night? Man, that was a fantastic game. If we have any Alabama or Georgia fans in here, congratulations. Those were two outstanding teams. And it really made me think about myself. I've been on a lot of teams in my life, and one of the things that I've learned over the years is all teams aren't created equal. The teams I love, they weren't in any of the playoffs, not professional, not collegiate, and we're going to get all those things fixed. So I like all of that. But great teams out there do things that other teams can't. They just take the cards that they're dealt, the environment that they find themselves in, and they just figure out a way to win. Not a lot of whining, and there's not a lot of finger pointing, and not a lot of blaming. They just focus on the task at hand, and they figure out ways to innovate through to the solution. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk with you about a little bit today, is some of the things that I'm seeing in the airline industry as the airline industry tries to innovate through the next couple of years. Southwest Airlines, I think, is a great team. We've got a lot of different competitive strengths as a team. You know, we've got a single fleet type. We've got the largest all-Boeing fleet in the world. That gives us an ownership cost advantage. It gives us a maintenance cost advantage. It gives us a pilot training advantage. It just gives us an expertise in flying the airplane. So that is an advantage for our company. We've got a point-to-point network. Most of the other airlines out that you see flying are hub and spoke. And that's great if you live in the hub city. You can fly nonstop everywhere you want to go. But if you don't live in the hub city, you've got to go through one of those hubs. And at Southwest Airlines, we've got cities like San Diego's or San Antonio's or Austin's or New Orleans, Nashville's. We have plenty of point-to-point service out there. You can fly nonstop. Gives us a big competitive advantage. We've got a really unique brand. We have a single class service. I call it all first class. If you've flown on Southwest, you know what I mean. And we have got no bag fees. We've got no change fees. We've got wrap that around in everyday low fares, try to stimulate the travel. And I think we offer our product out there in kind of a hospitality and a little bit of humor. It's a little bit of a uniqueness in what you get with the airline industry. And then lastly, we're very, very financially conservative. We're an investment grade rating in the airline industry that is rare. And most carriers are not that. But the most important competitive advantage that we have in our industry, and I'm sure it's just like your all's businesses, it's the people. The people are the thing that make the difference out there every day. When I started at Southwest back in the early 90s, Herb was using this phrase that he wanted the Southwest Airlines team to have the speed and alacrity of a puma. The speed and alacrity of a puma. I know exactly what you're thinking. What in the world does that mean? And only Herb could tell you. So I thought about that a little bit. I had to go look up the word alacrity. I didn't know what it meant. So it means a cheerful readiness and a promptness in response. And I couldn't ever figure out why in the world you pick a puma. Why not a tiger or a lion or a cobra or something that I knew? So I went and I researched the puma a little bit. So a puma is an animal that can outrun most of its predators. It's very adaptable to its environment, and it's an effective hunter day and night. And I thought about that a little bit, and I understood what he meant, the speed and the alacrity of a puma. He wants the Southwest Airlines team, and probably any one of your business teams, to, with a smile on our face and in a moment's notice, go chase down any competitor in any operating environment, day or night, and beat them. And that is what we are trying to get our people to do. And they've got to be bought in to that innovation and bought into that adaptability, because we want them to go out and we want them to outserve and outsmart and out-hustle the competition. And I wanted to talk with you all just a bit about those three pieces, kind of some of the innovation that we're seeing in the airline industry and maybe Southwest with respect to that. So on the outserving piece of the business, when I started at Southwest, we were famous for saying that we were low-tech and high-touch. I mean, we wore that like with a badge of honor. We didn't want any of those stinking computers in our business messing things up. And that worked really, really well for us right up until a point in time that these little smartphones were invented. And then overnight, literally, we needed to be in an environment we were high-tech and high-touch, because every employee and every customer needs to have information at their fingertips, on their watch. It needs to be exactly right. They need to be able to share it with thousands of people instantaneously and live their life that way. And we had a lot of work to do to go build that infrastructure up at Southwest. And we're really focused on information exchange and mobility of information as we go forward. There are two big things that I think that we're seeing in the industry that are different. One of the things that we're doing is investing in what we're calling Listening Center. And that is a group of people that their job is to sit down and to monitor real-time social media networks and the news, with the idea being that we've got to marshal our resources as soon as these emerging issues start to develop. They become viral very quickly, and we want to be a part of messaging that story. We want to be part of that information, and we need to go make sure that we can resource and marshal our teams to go do that. You used to be able to go do things like that in days. Today, it is literally minutes. A minute from something happening, a shooting in Las Vegas, to you've got to go make reactions on what you're going to go do and tell your customers about Las Vegas. A minute from an electrical outage in the Atlanta airport to what you're going to go tell your customers. So I think that is something that is really introducing transparency into organizations. And when you're transparent, it really reveals whether you're authentic or not. And if your customer experience that you're delivering out there on the front line isn't what your marketing department is designing your brand to be, you really get called onto the carpet for that. You can really be great if it's the same, and you can really find yourself in an embarrassing position. So the information exchange is important. The second thing that we're really seeing with data sciences is robotics and the artificial intelligence. And I agree with what Robert was saying, is that is really accelerating. One of the biggest challenges that the airline industry faces is when you have these external influences and they happen, you have a tremendous surge in information requests from your customers and your employees. And it can be from a telephone, it can be on your website, it can be email, it can be text, it can be chat. And if you can't answer them fast enough, that immediately goes out into the social media network. And so we are having a lot of investment in that kind of machine learning, where you can actually have computers talk and chat and exchange conversations with customers. And I think we will see that build in the airline industry over the next several years. And I think it will improve both the customer experience and also, I think, our employees' quality of life. In terms of outsmarting the competition, Colleen Barrett, who was our president and president emeritus, she used to say that Southwest Airlines was a customer service company that just happened to fly airplanes. And I really like that mental picture about how important customer service is in a business, even if it's a commodity business that some may think the airline industry is. But as a chief operating officer, one of the things I've been saying is I feel like we're in one of the most complicated logistics companies in the world. We've got to match people and bags with crews, with maintenance programs that are specific to each individual airplane, and we have 700 of them flying around at the same time. And I thought I'd give you guys hopefully this will work, a picture of what a day in the life of Southwest Airlines looks like. So we start off the day, and that's what our day looks like as the airplanes start the day and fly. And so long as everything goes as planned, that works pretty well. You all may have flown in the industry, may have had a trip or two in your past that sometimes it doesn't go quite as well as you might think. And so that's what you really need to understand in terms of our industry. And I've got another slide here. I want to get down to one more level of detail just about how complicated the logistics are. And I'm going to show you an airplane, and it's going to start. I think it starts in Greenville, South Carolina. I think it ends its day in Spokane. As it flies to its destination, it's going to show you how many people and how many airplanes it connects with through each trip. So here it starts on this first segment. It's going to Midway. It lands. Those are the airplanes it had to connect to with people. It's flying over to, I guess, Albuquerque or maybe it's El Paso, going up to Vegas, Reno, back to Vegas. Heading to San Antonio, dropping some customers off probably. Going up to Las Vegas, I believe. Oh, no, Denver, I'm sorry, Denver. And then finally, ending the day in Spokane. So that one airplane connected 300 customers to 82 different flights. So you're probably thinking the same thing I am. We have 700 airplanes doing that every day. What possibly could go wrong with that? And things go wrong with that all the time. It's simple things. You've got weather patterns you've got to go fly around. The challenge that we have in the industry is to have solutions, innovative solutions to go figure that out. The range of solutions are endless. And there's no way that a human being can go deliver the right solution. So we've had a lot of investment with respect to data sciences and machine learning and algorithms that are taking all the different airplane swaps and customer reaccommodations you could make and say, what is the best solution that disrupts the fewest amount of customers and provides us the lowest cost profile? And there's a lot of investment and there's a lot of growth in that. The product that we're designing ourselves, because we're the only one out there that flies a point-to-point network that big, a lot of that learning we're doing ourselves. And it started with a guy by the name of Mike Baker, and he's deceased now, but he was a superintendent of dispatch for us, and he used to do all that manually and starting to build out those processes. So it's just it's one of the great frontiers in the data sciences with the business. And then lastly, talking a little bit about out-hustling. We've got 4,000 flights a day at Southwest Airlines, and we figured out over the course of 45 years, they make a lot more money when they're flying than they do when they're sitting on the ground. So, being the brilliant leaders that we are, we decided that if we can, when the airplane comes into the airport, if we can unload it and get it loaded up and get it going again as fast as possible, that's probably the best for us. So we've always been focused on our turn, and I think we're famous for having really quick turns in the airline industry. But there is a lot of innovation I think we can still do with respect to turning the airplanes. One of the things we're focused on is dual boarding and deplaning. So the airplanes have two doors. They got a door in the front, got a door in the back. We've got a couple of airports in Burbank and Ontario. They're set up and we use both of those doors. And that's a great customer experience, getting on and off the airplane. It allows us to have more flights a day with the same airplane because you can unload them and load them faster. And it's just a great opportunity. So we're looking for opportunities that where we can expand that to different locations. There will be some facility investments we need to do. There'll be some airport partnerships we need to have. There's a little bit of process change what we need there, but we feel like that we can spread that out to a meaningful number of gates in some specific airports around the country, and be able to generate more flying either with the same fleet or have a better reliable service with the existing fleet. But either way, it's a win-win. It's better, more reliable operations for the customers, and it's lower fares for the customers. The second thing that we are seeing in the turning process is there's a lot of innovation, I believe, coming into ground equipment. I've been at Southwest for almost 25 years, and pretty much a bag tug was a bag tug, a belt loader was a belt loader, and there wasn't much difference between all the different opportunities out there. But there are belt loaders out there now. We've got some in Dallas that are, we call them power stows, and it takes the conveyor system from the lip of the bin, and you can pull that conveyor system all the way into the airplane, and you can drop the bag exactly where you want to put it in the bin. Before that, you'd have a bag handler at the end of the cargo, the conveyor system. He'd push the bag up to another worker, and they're trying to stack a bag up 7 or 8 bags high, and this machine eliminates the wear and tear on your body, and it eliminates the second person. So again, just another great piece of innovation there, and I think it's going to help the cost profile of the industry. It'll help keep the fares low and hopefully stimulate more traffic. You know, Herb's, God, he's so famous for so many different great quotes. But when I started at Southwest, the industry was in terrific turmoil, and there were a lot of bankruptcies going on. And Herb was talking about only the strong survive, only the strong survive. Focus on service, focus on cost. And I think, you know, so many things change, a lot of things stay the same. And that's the same place that we are in the industry today. But I think the stakes are higher. The strong don't just survive. The strong, you've got to be strong to prosper. Most of the people, most of the airline executives, if they were standing up here in front of you today, I think they feel pretty good about their business right now. The economy is solid and stable. I like the tax cuts that we have, at least from the airline industry. It gives us a much more level playing field with respect to the rest of the businesses we're out there competing for the investment dollar with. Fuel is stable. It helps planning significantly when fuel will trade in a decent price range. There's clearly opportunities to continue to innovate in the airline industry. We've got new airplanes coming from Boeing and from Airbus that are 15% better in terms of fuel burn than the airplanes that are out there today. And we're hopeful maybe as part of this government reform and infrastructure investment that our air traffic control system can be part of that. It's one of the only areas of the world where over the last 20 years it's actually slower today than it was 20 years ago. It takes more time to fly from Dallas to Houston today than it did 20 years ago, and the airplanes are faster. So it just really brings me back to fielding a great team. And I don't care really what industry that you're in, probably every one of your businesses, you need to have your employees bought in where they can go strike with the speed and the alacrity of a Puma. You want them to go out there and out-serve and outsmart and out-hustle the competition. And I can tell you that's what we're going to be focused on every day at Southwest Airlines, because we really do want to earn your business. And so thank you all for listening, and here's to a great 2018 for each and every one of you all. Great job.
That was great. Southwest is a great corporate citizen in Dallas as well, and Southwest Airlines, great partner of AT&T, supplier to AT&T, customer of AT&T. We do a lot of things together. Rob, thanks for hosting this event and for your comments, and Jay, thanks for inviting me. Jay, I almost had to cancel. My 2 older boys graduated from University of Georgia, and they've required a lot of care and feeding over the past 8 hours. But that's nothing new with them, by the way. But I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm especially excited to talk about innovation. It's something I'm passionate about. It's something that I think AT&T has a heritage of. In fact, if we move on to this slide, this just kind of steps back for a minute about AT&T's heritage of innovation. And you all know about 140 years of innovation that's occurred across this company, starting with Alexander Graham Bell and the telephone. We've invented transistors, we've invented satellite technology, we've invented microwave technology. We brought sound to Hollywood in the 20s with sound motion picture. And in 1969, we invented Unix, the Unix operating system, which later became Linux and variants of that, which now are the underpinnings of the internet. And in the 90s and continuing on to today, we're continuing to invest and develop machine learning algorithms, artificial intelligence, and I'll reference some of that in a few minutes as well. These innovation programs are market-driven. They're required because you're going to see how our customers are transforming themselves. We use, our labs used to be highly concentrated in New Jersey. We still have significant laboratory resources in New Jersey and in, across the country. But now we have something we call foundries, AT&T foundries, and these are our industry-facing innovation centers. And I'll talk more about them in a minute, but they fuel the discussions with developers and entrepreneurs and venture capitalists. And so this is all driven by the need to create innovation, new services and products that help people when they live, work, and play. So let me zoom out for a minute, and I suspect a lot of what's on the page here is going to resonate with the people in here about how consumer and business needs and uses are transforming, starting with video and the movement from a linear product and an augmentation of that with online and on-demand video services, so over-the-top solutions, et cetera, sort of the video wherever you are, whenever you are. Second is advertising, and there is a movement of that becoming more digital, more targeted, so that the right ad gets placed in front of somebody at the right time in the right place. Purchasing, I'm sure many of you are like me. Much of your purchasing for the holiday season was done online. That's a major shift in the economy, a major shift in how business gets done. And it's for services as well as for hard goods and products. User interfaces, significant shifting if you think about it, from typing. We still type a lot of email and text messages and so forth, but a major shift toward the use of voice technology for communication and for inputting data. Same with image technology, where you can take a photograph of a product, a television set, for example. Automatically, the web can search for that information of where can you buy that, what is the price tag, what are your options for getting it. So even user interfaces are changing. IT infrastructure. Many people in this room run companies or run IT infrastructure for companies. The movement to virtualize everything, moving things to the cloud, it's having a dramatic impact. And lastly, content. How there's a movement toward more targeted, more specific, more tailored viewing experiences for the consumer. So what do these mean to us at AT&T? And this is a pretty dramatic chart, actually, and it came from Mary Meeker of Kleiner Perkins. And our data would sort of reflect this. This is essentially showing over time the rapid increase in data developed and transmitted over networks. And there's a reference to a ZB. ZB stands for zettabytes. Most of you have probably not heard of that before. Just to give you a sense, 1 zettabyte is the equivalent of 8 million years of video, high definition video. Okay, and so in that last year, which actually is sort of the 2025 timeframe, 163 zettabytes of data will be generated in that year, 13 times what it is today. So that rapid increase has a massive implication on our network technology, on storage technology, on everything that we do. And that proliferation is changing the way people work and live and play. And that's part of the reason that we've invested as much capital as we have. We invest on the order of $20 billion a year. From the years 2012 to 2016, AT&T invested $105 billion in infrastructure. And that's digging up, dirt, putting in fiber technology, putting in cell towers, et cetera. I'll be surprised if there isn't a question about tax reform and the implications of that and how that's driving more investment. We're definitely seeing that upward trend. This is an interesting chart. Came from Morgan Stanley. What it's showing is how the financial markets are rewarding changes in the technology, media, and telecom sector. TMT, technology, media, and telecom sector. And if you can't see it, on the left-hand side are 5 companies. So this represents the equity value of 5 companies, and in the circle is their growth over the past 12 months and the past 3 years. Those 5 companies, we affectionately refer to them as the FANGs. That's Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google, the FANGs. So they are on the left-hand side, and across the rest of this is the rest of the ecosystem. Think of these as the names you would all know, including ourselves and the cable companies, Activision-type companies in the gaming space, international distributors of satellite technology, et cetera, and global media companies. And the striking thing about this slide is what it shows is that those 5 companies have increased in value over the past 1 year and the past 3 years more than 3 times the rest of the ecosystem combined. Okay, that is how the markets are rewarding those companies and how rapidly value is shifting in this industry. So our next step in our innovation journey is Time Warner. I won't be able to talk much about that today, so hold your questions. But as I said, consumers and businesses alike are transforming how they operate today, how they consume media, entertainment, video technology, telecommunications services, and we hope to advance our innovation across that entire domain. So with that, let me move on quickly. So let's talk about how we're going to pivot. I want to pivot to talk about innovation and dig a little deeper into how do we do this at AT&T. And I think a lot of this will resonate with what you heard a little bit earlier from the previous speakers. We'll start with the network. This will be no surprise to any of you that we put the network at the center of our innovation efforts, and the reason for that is that is our core competency, our core infrastructure. That's where the majority of our capital investment goes. We're opening that up, though, to external development. So it includes not just the innovation that we do internally, but we're opening it up to an ecosystem of other developers. And we do that by enabling third parties to incorporate network functionality into their applications. So let me give you a specific example. If you're developing a website for your company and you want the consumer, while they're on your website, to be able to click to chat to a service representative, that requires a call to be set up for an internet connection to be established, et cetera. So we open those up through what are called APIs, application programming interfaces or microservices. Think of those as little subroutines that developer would build into their code to be able to do that. Similarly, if you run a financial wealth management company and you want to send a text message to an investor that their stock trade had happened, you would require that technology to be implemented in that program. So we're opening that up. We have massively expanded the number of applications and network functions that can be automatically introduced into your programs. So that's spawning a great deal of innovation. So this whole ecosystem, you know, we recognized about 20 years ago, we couldn't develop it all ourselves. We were going to require a lot of help. In fact, opening things up, becoming a more open model was in our best interest and the best interests of our customers. And so not only do we do our own internal research, but we work with third parties, like I talked about a minute ago. I think of our research, our internal research, as the tip of the spear of how we do our own innovation, and whether we're talking about cloud or software technology, networking, big data applications, or customer experience. We do all of those internally, many times with partners. We have probably the largest crowdsourcing internal application. Think of it like a suggestion box that we use internally to field our employee base with the opportunity to introduce new ideas. And we call that TIP, the innovation pipeline. So the TIP program is essentially an online program that 130,000 of our employees are members of. They submit ideas for innovation. They have the opportunity to be down selected to then come and present their idea to a panel of executives and get their project funded. And we've had a number of new innovative ideas and new patents come out of this process. Then we have our 6 foundries that I mentioned earlier. Think of these as our front door, how we face innovation externally. That's where we invite companies through fast pitch programs to come and pitch their ideas, their technology to us, run them through our labs, and create customer solutions. But ultimately, our goal is to create one-of-a-kind of experiences that are differentiated for home, work, and play. For instance, you know, there's a lot of interest around self-driving vehicles and connected cars, et cetera. So we established in Atlanta a drive studio. Think of that as a laboratory specifically focused on the connected car. And as we develop 5G technology and we work with auto manufacturers, this is a place where smart minds can come together and create new capabilities for those vehicles. That has been an eye-opener for all of us about how if you create a special purpose innovation center in a specific industry, whether it's healthcare, which we've done in Houston, by the way, but we've also done it in Atlanta, we've done it in Israel for our work around security, cybersecurity. It becomes a concentration point for an entire ecosystem. Speaking of security, you have to do a lot of innovation around security if you're in our business. Software is eating the world. That's what Mark Andreessen said a few years ago. And the fact is, with the software comes cybersecurity risks. And so we have a laboratory in Israel where we do a great deal of development work there. We have innovation centers across the company that develop things like NetBond, AT&T NetBond. That's a capability to essentially extend your private network into the public cloud. So if you use Amazon Web Services for your cloud, or Microsoft Azure for your cloud, and you're moving your payroll system into one of those clouds, or you're using Salesforce.com, and you need to protect that information. You don't want it going over the public internet. And so we've developed something called NetBond that keeps that on your private network while also using those resources in the public cloud. We've also developed self-healing and self-learning networks that kind of reform around you. So if you are on a trip to China, the network knows that. Your policy management restricts maybe certain content that might go in and out of your devices while you're in China versus when you're in Eastern Europe versus when you're in Latin America versus when you're in Dallas, Texas. So you can create policies to control that, and it also gives us the ability to manage from the edge where the technology is actually residing, from the edge, being able to identify the threats that are occurring and mitigate those threats before they breach any consumer or business location. Mike made these comments about the employees. He's dead on about that. You know, this is only going to work for employees who are at the top of their game. And as a company that has well over 200,000 employees, it's impossible to replace all those employees with next generation technologists. You have to retrain those employees. And that's why AT&T invests $250 million a year in its internal training programs. We have something we call AT&T University, which is where we do the majority of our training for our teams, and it's recognized as one of the world's leading training programs for a corporation. Externally, we work with partners like University of Texas and McCombs. We have innovative programs with companies like Udacity and Coursera to create nano degrees to enable our teams to be able to up their game and fill the jobs of the future, which is absolutely imperative, and extend their career journeys with AT&T. Ultimately, we all know it's about results, and we're finding our approach is working. We work with more than 500 startups a year through those foundries. We've developed self-optimizing networks that if there's a fault somewhere, they automatically reconfigure around the fault. We've created robotic process automation, RPAs. Many of your companies probably use these. This technology is software. Think of it as bots that automate repetitive tasks online for employees so they can work on a higher order function. And then remote patient monitoring, which enables doctors to reach remote locations and monitor various vital signs. So that's just a handful of innovations that we've done. You don't have to take my word for it. Industry analysts, consumers, customers around the globe are seeing it. They're embracing the technology. And the constant changes in consumption behavior are keeping us on the forefront of this. We have to. You saw those charts earlier about how fast data is rising, what the competitive landscape looks like. You can see how where financial investment is moving, so we have to keep on our toes and keep innovating. And it's all consistent with AT&T's heritage of innovation that's been our trademark for the past 140 years. So with that, I'll hand it back to Jay. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great.
All right, great. Thanks again to our panelists. We've got some time for Q&A. And so there's some cards on your table. You can turn those cards in and they'll come up to me and I will deliver them to the panel. And then there are also some mics. So if you prefer to just own up to your question publicly, then we have people wandering around with mics and you can ask it in person. And as the cards are coming in, maybe I'll just kick it off and throw a first question. Everybody, all three of you referenced the tax cuts. And you know, Mike and Steve, your firms chose to use part of that to deliver back to your employees. And maybe you could talk a little bit about not only those decisions, but how you see it affecting investment. And maybe Rob, if you can give a little bit of a long-term view of how you all think about the impact of that going forward. So Steve, do you want to start?
Yeah, this is really a monumental shift from our perspective. I think Mike made the comment earlier about leveling the playing field, making, U.S. tax rates for corporations, consistent with the rest of the globe, super, super important, and I think it'll yield investment. We're an example of that. We committed to invest $1 billion more on top of the $20+ billion that we were already going to invest. So increase that amount by $1 billion for deploying more fiber, putting in more cell sites, supporting the growth in that data that we talked about. The research shows that $1 billion investment in that kind of infrastructure creates, at a minimum, 7,000 hard hat type jobs. Okay, so for every incremental billion, it's a lot of jobs that are being created. And Rob made the comment that our economy is driven heavily by a combination of jobs and productivity. And so as companies invest more in new technology, not only does it create new jobs from the infrastructure standpoint, it also increases their productivity. So we're really thrilled about the progress there. We gave a bonus to our employees, and this is a frontline employees, 200,000 plus employees got a $1,000 bonus before the end of the year. We did that as recognition for all that they've done. They may not all benefit from the financial sector, the investment growth that you might see in stock prices and so forth, and they will also be able to feed some of that back into the economy. Here it's a nice little Christmas bonus that no one was expecting, and it should fuel that 70% of the GDP that we're talking about. Mike.
Yeah, just really a lot of the same. So the tax change was significant for Southwest. It's been nice that we've been profitable for such a long period of time, but that also means that we've been a cash taxpayer for a long period of time, and the effective tax rate coming down just really does help the cash flow of our business. And it was an opportunity for us to share a little with our employees, even before we really have felt the benefit of it from a company, but also know that it gives us opportunities to go invest in the business, modernize our fleet, make investments out in the airport facilities, self-check bag kiosks, those kinds of things, and then also gives us an opportunity to maybe share some of that also with our shareholders. So it's just a great opportunity for us and probably any other business out there that has got such a big improvement in cash flow. It just gives you more flexibility to do some of the things that you've been planning on.
So from an economic point of view, and I've been saying this for the last number of months, and I would probably reiterate what we've been saying leading up to the legislation. The corporate tax reform elements of this, with both of you have referenced, we've here, and I've been a big supporter of. I think anything that makes it more likely that businesses here can invest in the United States, have incentives to invest in the United States, are more sustainably competitive. I think all that helps lead to sustainable growth in the United States, and we think we will see that. The caution that along with that, though, of also given is we are at or near full employment in the United States. Even when you look at discouraged workers and people working part-time for economic reasons, we have very little labor slack. Corporate profits are at record highs already before the bill. Market cap is already at 140% of GDP. And the only caution is the parts of the bill that are a tax cut that are funded by increasing debt to GDP, i.e. the deficit. My concern is you won't get as big a bump as we have gotten in previous times. The 80s are often used as an example, but in the 80s we had improving demographics and we had lots of labor slack. Right now we have deteriorating demographics and in fact increasing labor shortages and very little labor slack. And my concern is that element that's a tax cut that's funded by increasing the debt is going to create a short-term bump. We're then going to trend back down to trend growth. And when that's over, we're going to be left with higher debt to GDP, which I think in the longer run is likely to create a headwind for economic growth. Now, what would help if we found ways to grow the workforce? I know it's controversial, but that would include immigration, tough borders, tough screening, but we need workforce growth. I think the regulatory review will be helpful. I think if we improved educational attainment, Texas is part of that, but we've got to improve college readiness, we've got to improve educational attainment, and we need a massive investment. Steve talked about the training AT&T does, but we need a massive investment in this country and really to catch up dramatically in middle skills training to allow people to get retrained. Those things will help, but the elements of the bill that I mentioned are part of it is, I think, going to be help sustainable GDP growth, and part of it, I think, is a little more cautionary.
Great, thank you. And Rob, you know, one of the things you talked about was the way we get growth is workforce and productivity. So you spent time talking about the headwinds. I've got several questions on the headwinds around the workforce, but can you talk a little bit about productivity? So there are questions here about, you know, all this technological innovation we talk about.
Yeah.
Why is that not fueling more productivity growth, or is that going to come?
Right.
What's going on there?
So I'm a business person. I'm a capitalist. I like making money. I happen to be doing public service right now. Fine, but I enjoyed making money before this, and I may make money again someday. But the point is, I'm a big fan of profits, and I'm a student of industries. I studied industries my entire career, and if you look at almost every single industry that I follow, it's rare. If you don't, it's rare that everyone it'd be rare to find one that isn't dramatically more productive today. And when I mean dramatically more productive, I mean higher output per worker, dramatically more productive than 10 years ago. So why isn't productivity better? Okay, and the reason is we measure productivity workforce-wide. Okay, so if your two companies are dramatically more productive, the issue is what's going on with the rest of the workforce that doesn't get to work at your two companies, or a lot of other great companies that we have in this country. And what we're finding is, again, if you've got a college education, you're probably pretty able to adapt. You're much more flexible to get retrained. You got better aptitude to do all that. If you've got a high school education or less, which is a substantial portion of the workforce, you're sort of getting whipped around by all these changes. And ironically, increased corporate investment in IT and technology might even further cause you to get squeezed out, unless you get retrained. And so I think there needs to be a redoubling of our efforts in this country, and in Texas, by the way, improve early childhood literacy, improve college readiness, and we've got to really, and we're doing it in this state, by the way, just not fast enough. Although we're leading, I think, most states in the country, we've got to improve middle skills training. Dallas Community College, a great example of a good shining light. El Paso Community College does a great job. But we're not doing it fast enough, and that's why I think productivity is lagging. We've got to really invest in the human capital in this country to get the benefits of a lot of the stimulus that we're providing, and I think we're slow and lagging right now.
Thank you. And to Mike and to Steve, so building on this human capital labor question, your firms are huge. They employ wide varieties of workers, right? From rocket scientists and computer scientists down to the maybe people who don't have college degrees and are doing other roles. Talk about your ability to attract talent, and how is that in today's labor market? Are you finding the talent you want? How competitive is that, and across sort of that spectrum? And what about, I have some questions about diversity. How are you going about trying to attract a diverse talent base as well?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I think we're finding the tight labor markets to be a challenge. Even for the majority of the roles that we're hiring in the field, customer-facing service reps and so forth, there still needs to be a fair amount of competency to handle the complexity of the technology, the types of calls that are coming in. Same thing with work in the field for fiber deployment, et cetera. But with that comes responsibility on our part, and that's why we have these training programs. to bring people in, candidates in, train them, tool them up, and get them in on their way. Students-wise, what we found is a very effective way to attract talent from schools like University of Texas at Austin is internships and programs that are leadership development programs that forcibly move those new employees around to new leadership. So they'll run a period of a call center. They'll run a call center for a while, and then they'll move to another role, which might be out putting in fiber, and then they may run to another organization for a year to manage an IT development process. To build some strong foundation and to Rob's point, build that versatility in their competency early in their career, and then moving people around kind of throughout their career so that they have a broad scope and have a lot of versatility. How about you?
Yeah, it's in terms of an employee, it's really just a tale of almost every individual work group. So when we have groups that are in revenue management or strategic planning or IT work or finance, it's very exciting. It's high energy work. We have a lot of people that want to come to Southwest. It's such a great place to work. We get tons of applicants for that. Interestingly enough, in terms of workplace productivity, while people don't think of, about half of our population at Southwest Airlines are pilots and flight attendants. Well, for every airplane that takes off and flies has 2 pilots in it, or 3 or 4 flight attendants, depending on the size of the airplane. So it's harder for us to go get those productivity gains when half of the workforce is regulatorily required to be there. So we go out and it has been difficult. I'll be honest with you, it has been difficult out there we get a lot of people out of high school. It's been difficult to find the high school workers that want to go to work in the airports. So you're a high school worker and you've got a job offer in Denver. You can either go drive 20 miles to the airport, park a mile away, pay for parking, go outside, work in the snow, the heat, the rain, the whatever, or you can go to Costco and work in their warehouse, which is a 5-mile drive for your house indoor in a air-conditioned facility, and maybe make $2 an hour more. Now, we have great wage scales in our contracts. They grow incredibly well. If you can stick out the first 3 or 4 years at Southwest, you've got a great career, great benefits, a great retirement program. It's a great career path, but you've got to get people early in their career interested about the next 3 or 4 or 5 years of their life. So we have had more challenges with respect to that. So we're trying to do things like offer more part-time work when we can, more job sharing, more training programs. Just get your foot in the door at Southwest Airlines, and we feel like we've got a great company with a lot of growth opportunities.
By the way, can I ask you, because this is good for me to, I can never help ask, I'd ask a lot more questions if we didn't have a big audience here, but what's the starting wage for those entry-level people?
I think it's around $11 an hour.
Okay. So one of the things we're finding is interesting in our surveys, there's a lot of pressure. If you're skilled worker, construction worker, oilfield service worker, IT specialist, right? There's shortages and there's more wage pressure. If you make less than $15 an hour, we notice there's a lot more competition for workers. If you make $20 an hour or more, you put one of those jobs out, you're going to have hundreds and hundreds, we hear, of high qualified workers for one position. And it sounds like that's consistent with a little bit with what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So anybody in the crowd? I can keep going. I've got more up here, but do I want to ask one? We got mics in the room. Nobody wants to be first. Please.
It's actually on one of your cards.
Okay.
This question is for Mike. And you talked about technology and investments, how it's made, and how it's increased your productivity and customer experience. How have you used technology to increase your security?
Are you talking about TSA security, airport security,
Well,
or technology security?
Technology security, but also folks getting on the plane. Do you have security screens in addition to what the TSA, a government organization, is providing? You, a private company, what security increases have you invested in?
Yeah, so we really are partnering very closely with the TSA. And I will just tell you the threat in terms of aviation security is real. I know that you all get probably frustrated going through and having to give all your information out to your reservation, in your PNR and go through the process, but it's necessary and the threat is real. So we partner with them tremendously, trying to make sure not only is the throughput through the system done well, but are they getting the information that they need in terms of screening equipment that can actually see inside the bags better, screening equipment that will alarm better. And so we spend a lot of time and a lot of effort. A lot of times, because it's the government, they'll have needs with equipment, needs with security that they can't go make the investment that you would want to have, and we'll kind of loan them the money to do that. And we'll go partner with them and make those investments and understand that how we'll get that returned in the future years. But outside, we don't have our own security programs outside of what the government is doing.
Okay. Please, go ahead.
We talked about the growth of technology and reference to artificial intelligence. My concern is that these technologies and developments are outpacing the development of the ethical and humanistic framework to cope with these technologies and the impact on humans. For example, we talked about truck drivers, self-driving trucks and the number of jobs that would eliminate. So are there any recommendations that you have where we can speed up the development of these ethical constructs to keep pace with the growth of technology?
Well, I'll take a stab at that, but I'll have to say I'll take your name and get you in touch with someone who's really thought this through more than I have. Innovation always brings with it risks, right? I mean, ever since, Da Vinci, people were saying, the technology is going to create, more problems than it's going to solve, and it's, and concerns about the ethical implications of it. I recognize the fact that artificial intelligence begins to introduce new decision-making technology that at the current model is it's heavily driven, frankly, by humans, right? The humans are the ones who are making the ultimate decisions. But over time, you can imagine that with rigorous testing, you could get into a situation where the software technology is making a decision without any human intervention whatsoever. We're a ways away from, fully autonomous vehicles driving long distances and eliminating lots of transportation jobs. My view is I am a believer in the economic theory that creates new opportunity for people to do other things. I realize that also creates a time lag, perhaps, of retraining and retooling that's necessary. But I'm optimistic about the technology, optimistic that it will be kept in the hands of people who are thinking smartly about how it can be best used. I mentioned robotic process automation earlier. That's not really robots entering keys, strokes. It's really programs that simulate that activity. And frankly, we do find that our employees, by use of robotic process automation, don't have to re-enter the same information over and over and over again. Instead, they can go work on solving the actual problem. And so we actually have studies of our own utilization and how that has created bandwidth for more work to be done. But it's an interesting area, and it's very difficult to see where the future might go with this. But we're not afraid of it. We're embracing it. We're studying it. We'll do a lot of testing of it before we deploy that kind of technology in a customer-facing way. I don't know if you have other thoughts.
So I agree. It all makes sense. I'm going to take a different aspect of this from an economic point of view. I am convinced you're going to see millions and millions of jobs destroyed, economy restructured. We're already in the economy now. that destroys 10 million jobs a year and creates about 12 million jobs a year. So there's a lot of destruction already going on. It's going to accelerate. And so for young, I used to be a professor for 10 years, and I'm sure Jay does the same thing. I always counsel young people, just be prepared. You're going to get fired more often than I did. You're going to fire people more often than I did. You're going to be in industries that get restructured out of existence, and you're going to have to adapt much more. That's a much tougher road than the one I think the three of us or the four of us had when we were starting in our career. We should be counseling people, get ready for it now. And then we've got to beef up, starting with reading, writing, communication skills, the basics have never been more important than they are today. There's a second aspect which I found at Harvard, which is a surprise. And I remember I did a lot of work with Google. I chaired their investment committee for many years. The psychological impact, and you're seeing this a little bit in this pushback on even the phone, that young people today are more isolated. There's less face-to-face communication. They're more networked, but they may actually have fewer relationships, I've learned in the work I've done, than in my previous career. And it means when they have a problem, they may not tell anyone. They may internalize it. Depression is a bigger issue. And so companies and all of us as parents and you name it need to be aware of that. These young people seem a lot more sophisticated than we were, but the truth is they're a lot more alone, isolated. They have a profile. I never had a profile, and they put on a face, but there's a lot of churning going on underneath, and I think technology is something we need to be adapting to realizing the impacts of that, and I think we've been a little slow to do that also.
For those of you that have kids or no kids of a certain age, try to ask them, they say, how can we do this? They say, well, pick up the phone and call them. Can I text? Right? Can I just send an email? Right? With that, I think our time is up, unfortunately. But thank you all again very much for coming. Hope to see you next year. And thanks again to our panelists.
Thank you very much.